Hi everyone, April was a really good reading month for me, and I think it's about time I just jumped straight in and talked about all the books and other things that I finished, because we don't want this to stretch on for too long. So the first book that I finished in April was Darkness Breaks, which is the second book in the Darkness Falls trilogy by Jessica Sorensen. I read the first book earlier this year and really liked it, and so I was eager to check the second one out, and it was on Scribd, so I gave it a read. This is a paranormal YA fantasy series that honestly I don't really know why I enjoy it so much. It might just be the whole escape thing. It's a very easy book to just sit and read without having to put too much thought and care and general mind thinking into the actual process of reading the book. As this is the second book in a series, I can't really tell you too much about what happens in this one. But in the first one, we meet a girl called Kayla, and she is, the easiest way of me putting it is, she is sent to, via a body bag, another area of the planet, and from there, her whole world has been turned upside down from what she knew, where she was living in this kind of almost dystopian kind of society, I suppose, into what is now on the outside of that. And we're talking things like vampires, we're talking about these things called hires, which they're kind of more like a extreme vampire with like extra powers. But then there's these other people as well, and there's just so much going on. It's just so typical of its time. But it's actually quite a fun, guilty pleasure kind of read for me. And I actually gave this book 3 stars. I will be continuing on. The next book that I finished was a book that I received free from the publishers via NetGalley. This is Dear Edward by Anne Napolitano. This is a contemporary fiction novel that follows one of the most heartbreaking storylines you could ever imagine having to follow. So we follow a young boy called Edward, surprisingly, who ends up being the sole survivor of a plane crash. It's truly absolutely heart-wrenching that this young boy not only loses his entire family like that, he also has to learn to live with it, while also the pressure of actually being the sole survivor and the media attention that brings, yet his own injuries along with it that take years to recover from. It's a really difficult read, but it's also fascinating, heartbreaking, generally just engrossing and page-turning. And I really enjoyed it. And I gave it 4 stars. Next, I listened to an audiobook which was Lady Oracle by Margaret Atwood. And this was an interesting one for me. In this book, we follow a woman that definitely ends up leading quite an interesting life. She's essentially got several identities, and there's a bit in there where she's faking her own death. It's all a bit weird at times. It's not very typical, that I know at least, Atwood, yet it's a lot more enjoyable than some of the other books of hers that I've picked up in the recent months. And as far as Aurelia novels go, this one isn't bad. It does mess with your head a bit, trying to keep up with what was going on with what. In the middle especially just got a bit much for me. Like, the beginning was really strong. The ending was blow your mind strong. Like, I loved that ending, but the middle was just really and quite difficult to follow, difficult to care about, and let this book down for me. So I actually gave this 4 stars in the end because that ending recovered it. It'd have been a 3-star read otherwise. Next, I listened to Persuasion by Jane Austen on Scribd, and I really enjoyed my experience of this. I've never listened to or read Persuasion before, so this was my first time being exposed to it. And it's definitely not one of my favourite Austen books, but it was an interesting one all the same, especially with this protagonist being a lot older than the other ones from her other novels. But yeah, I wasn't thrilled, I wasn't head over heels, and so it was just quite an average listen for me overall, and so I gave this one 3 stars. Next, I listened to another audiobook on Scribd, and that was The Treatment by C.L. Taylor. This is the second C.L. Taylor book I've read, the first being The Escape, which I also listened to on audiobook and also thoroughly enjoyed. So this was C.L. Taylor's first kind of dabble in a YA thriller, and as far as YA thrillers go, I quite enjoyed this one. It's got quite a weird premise though. So we've got these siblings, and the boy has been getting in trouble a lot at school, and so in the end they send him off to this treatment centre to try and learn to behave better, basically. The girl, who is normally well behaved, decides that she wants to get herself sent there because there's some fishy goings on, and she receives this weird letter from another source that's apparently from her brother, and she doesn't know whether he's just sort of pulling some sort of prank or whether there's something more to it. And so she wants to check this out for herself, and so she starts misbehaving so she can also get sent there. And that's where the story really picks up. I enjoyed this one. I enjoyed meeting the different characters that I met within the treatment centre. I enjoyed the directions the plot went. It was a little bit weird, but I was happy with weird. And this was honestly just what I needed at that time. It was something that I could listen to and work my way through without having to totally engage my brain again, with my mind wandering with everything else that's been going on. It was nice to just have something that was low maintenance but fun. Something that wasn't low maintenance or indeed all that fun some of the time was Starla Sea by Erin Morgenstern. This was the next book that I finished in April, and this had been taking me a while. I mean, it is a big, chunky, beautiful book. It's probably quite a standard font, I suppose. But yeah, this I was reading at a rate of maybe 25 to 30 pages an hour, which is not a lot. And the main reason for this is not that the font was jam-packed, because as you just saw, it wasn't too bad. It was that it was so dense and so complex. I enjoyed this a lot, but there were a lot of buts with my enjoyment for this. So we follow a character called Zachary, and he discovers a strange book in his library. And after doing some asking around, he doesn't get to learn an awful lot about this book, except that it doesn't seem to be listed within the library catalogue in any way, shape or form. His inquiries, though, do start to kind of raise a few eyebrows elsewhere as people start to discover that he has this book. And so the plot moves from there. It's a really interesting plot, but it does so much jumping around. You end up essentially with a book inside of a book at times, which was interesting, but it made the plot just move very slowly. It made it all very difficult to follow. Sometimes I'd have to completely reread an entire chapter because I'd realised that I'd kind of lost my way. And yeah, this is just actually really hard work to read, and it'll be one of those books that will benefit a lot from a reread, I think. And while I would love to do that, it's definitely not top of my priority list. So one day I will reread this and probably end up giving it a 4 stars, but right now it sits at 3 stars. The next book I finished in April was The Sky is Everywhere by Jandy Nelson. This follows a young girl as she struggles to come to terms with the loss of her sister, and how that just generally impacts not only her life, but her sister's boyfriend's life, her family's life, and how that all intertwines. You get cute little messages at the beginning of each chapter. So for example, that one is a piece of music paper spiked on a low branch. But then we also have candy wrapper on the trail to the Rain River. And these feature at the beginning of each chapter throughout the book, and you learn a lot about how the main character is really coping from these. And they play into the plot as well, which ends up being quite a nice little extra. I actually wrongly stated the star rating for this in my previous review on my Owls video, and I said that I'd given this 4 stars. I'd actually marked it as a 5-star read on Goodreads, but the fact that I hadn't remembered it was a 5-star read has made me think maybe it's not a 5-star read. So with all the best will in the world, I'd probably say this was a 4.5 stars for me, and I thoroughly enjoyed it. I did wonder whether this would be for me at this point, because I've just had it for so long, and with it being a YA contemporary, which is a bit iffy anyway. But yeah, I can't fault this book, and it broke me in places. Then I listened to an audiobook again on Scribd again. I listened to The Subtle Art of Not Giving a Fuck by Manson, narrated by Roger Wayne. I'm not even entirely sure what made me pick this book up in the end. I think it might be that it was just something totally different. I was looking for something a bit different that, again, I didn't have to put too much thought into, and I find that non-fiction is often the easiest direction for me to go with the audiobook route if I don't want to have to concentrate 150%. And so I just stumbled across this one and went, yeah, why not? And my yeah, why not led to a 4-star read of this book. So this is a self-help book, but not overly really. It's more just a look at life in general and how we treat certain situations, and how there's only so many things in the world that you can care about, and why worry about the rest, is essentially the book in shortness. The next book I read is one that I've not got the dust jacket on for right now, and that is the Animal Crossing guidebook. I'll say it before, I've said it again, I'm counting this because there are many pages like this one with chunks of text. I did plenty of reading when I looked at this book. It's not all pictures, although there are a lot. Yeah, this is a book that I felt very strongly about reviewing, and so I have left a review which I will link in the cards, and if I remember the description down below, so you can find out more about this, because so many people are playing Animal Crossing right now because it is such a wonderful escape. I'm at 205 hours myself, so how I've managed to read this much as well is quite beyond me. But yeah, I gave this 4 stars. Next, I listened to something that is probably a bit iffy that I counted on Goodreads, but all the same, I have. I listened to the Matt Lucas Audible Sessions free interview on Audible, and this was really insightful. I didn't know, for example, that he'd had alopecia from like a really young age. I thought it was something he probably got when he was older. Yeah, bless him that he had to learn how to deal with that at like the age, I can't remember what he said, like 5, 6, I don't remember. It was just really insightful to learn new things about him in such a quick, easy, accessible way. And as a result, I gave this 4 stars. I then listened to the same kind of thing again, only with Samantha Shannon, and this one was also really insightful. I've never read anything by Samantha Shannon, but I do own a couple of her books and I'm hoping to get around to them at some point. Yet I still found this a really interesting listen and was able to sort of garner a lot from it, and so I also gave this 4 stars. Then I listened to Don't Stay Up Late by R.L. Stine. This is the second book in the Fear Street Relaunch series, and the narrator for the audiobook is Brittany Pressley. I listened to this on Scribd again. Scribd earned its money's worth in April. So even though this is a reboot, this is still set in the original Fear Street area of Shadyside, which is where the original books were also set. I didn't hear any references to stuff from what I was familiar with from the ones as a child, but that doesn't mean they went there. Meanwhile, I really enjoyed just being back in the world again. Really enjoyed being back in that whole child kind of nostalgia again. It was really quite fun to just listen to something that was, again, easygoing and just a little bit wacky and a little bit out there, which the plot of this was a little bit wacky and a little bit out there. So this girl's parents are being quite strict and won't let her out, and so she sneaks out and goes to a restaurant with her friends. The parents somehow miraculously know where she is and turn up there and make her leave. So they all go off together in the family car, and on the way home the car crashes and the girl is badly injured, and when she wakes up she finds out that not everyone else has survived the crash either, and it leads to her having quite a traumatic time in her life trying to sort of get herself over this and get herself past all of that, and trying to sort of not assert all the blame on herself. It means that she ends up seeing a therapist and tries to get her life back on order that way, but as a result, everything else goes a little bit more wrong because something really sinister starts happening in her life. And actually, the end twist of this book was just so typical Goosebumps kind of feeling, that this book was just everything that I needed. I know it's not Goosebumps, but the Fear Street and Goosebumps were always quite a similar sort of tone. And so yeah, I really enjoyed this and I gave it 4 stars. Next, I listened to another Audible session. This time I listened to Laini Taylor. And again, I've not read anything by Laini Taylor, despite the fact that I own a fair few of her books now. And again, it just helped me sort of see into her world more and made me really interested in actually picking her books up. And so I gave this 4 stars as well. After that, I read Becoming the Super Vet by Noel Fitzpatrick. And this is another book that I gave 4 stars to. This is his memoir from basically childhood, maybe even beyond that really. You sort of hear about his initial first days on the planet, all the way up to where he is now. And this is just such an interesting read for me. It was a bit dry in places, but I suppose that's to be expected when you're kind of reading a memoir. Not everything is going to be all exciting and thrilling. And so I found at times that this was best read actually just reading it a chapter at a time, which worked really well for it. But also as I got further into it, I couldn't resist just carry on reading, and it landed itself quite well in that way once I was into it as well. But I learned so much about Noel in this book. I didn't know, for example, that he had been on Casualty or he had been on Heartbeat. I didn't know any of that stuff. And yeah, you get to learn more about his family, his personal life, his past pets. I thoroughly enjoyed this, and I'm surprised this hasn't got more ratings on Goodreads than what it has actually. Like, it's got less than 2,000 ratings. People need to read this book, it's great. And the final book that I finished in April, sort of, it was more the beginning of May actually, but I'm counting it for this one, is The Demons Lexicon by Sarah Rees Brennan. And this was quite a rough ride for me actually. I ended up giving this 3 stars. It's a YA fantasy novel following Nick and his brother Alan. Their mother left an important magician and had taken something from him and he wanted it back. And that's the essential beginnings of this plot, at least. And the beginning was quite interesting, and then the middle I was bored beyond anything. I mean, like, I wanted to DNF, but I didn't want to DNF at the same time because Aoife really liked this book, so I was like, there must be something in here worth reading for. I'll keep going. And then it got even more boring, if that was even possible. Like, I was starting to really struggle beyond anything, so I just stopped even picking it up half of the time. Then after that, I then moved on to okay, look, let's just push through this. And then once I started doing that, the end sort of 30% or so was pretty interesting, and I was glad I'd stuck with it. And yeah, led to me giving this book 3 stars overall because it pulled me through. I've not got an awful lot more to say about that though. It's definitely one of those books that'll be quite meh for me when I look back at my reads over the year. And I don't know whether I'll continue on with the series or not. If I own it, I probably will. Otherwise, I probably won't. And that was everything that I read, listened to, generally consumed in the month of April. And a teeny bit of May. But yeah, quite a decent amount there, I'd say. Let me know what you read during the month of April. Whether you've got any recommendations, whether you've read any other books that I talked about today. I would love to know. Drop me a comment down below. But thank you so much for watching this video. If you liked it, please give it a thumbs up. Subscribe by clicking the image of me if you want to see more book reviews and other bookish content from me. And I will see you soon. Bye bye.